Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake, and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake, and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth, and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
One thing that I really like about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is how easy it would have been for them to just bow down and worship the golden statue and think to themselves, oh, I don't actually believe in this, I still believe in the one true God. And they could have just gone about their lives, without having to go through this big ordeal, but instead, with bravery and the knowledge that they were protected by God, they were able to go ahead and take that stand. And in the end, not only were they blessed, but the whole kingdom was blessed to see this great demonstration. I think that can apply to our lives in a lot of different ways. We're not usually going to be asked to show our beliefs and go through a fiery furnace, but maybe we might face a situation where we have to stand up for our beliefs when it may be the unpopular thing to do, or address a situation that is sort of nagging at our life, but that doesn't seem to be, destroying it, when it may seem like a difficult situation to address, but it does need to be addressed. So I was thinking there are definitely a lot of different ways that it can be applied to modern life, and I think that's pretty cool.
I guess there are really two things that stand out to me about the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story. One that always strikes me when I read it is that God did not remove the trial and the burden from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He didn't stop the fire, he didn't suddenly, strike everyone dead, they weren't instantly transported somewhere else. They still had to go through the situation that they were going through, and that didn't change. But what did happen is that an angel came into the furnace with them and was there with them, and because of that, they were not harmed. And I think as we consider the story in light of our own lives, that same thing can happen, where a lot of times we want to be just magically lifted out of whatever situation we're in, and that usually doesn't happen. But what does happen is God promises to help us, and when we have faith in Him, He always comes through on that promise, and sometimes that can happen in a lot of different forms, but He's always there supporting us, and I know that's something that has really strengthened my faith. Another aspect of the story that I really like is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were kind of alone in terms of what they believed going through the situation, that they didn't have a big other congregation of people that was there with them, supporting them, reminding them of what they knew was right, and kind of reaffirming their beliefs, that they had to be strong enough in what they believed themselves to be able to go through this entire situation, even being faced intimately with their own deaths, and they were still able to stand by what they knew was right and can continue to confirm their belief in God. And I love that about this story.
I think one of the things that I really like about this story is that it really causes us to question some very basic beliefs that maybe we grow up with. I think from a really early age, we learn don't touch, it's hot, fire burns. Yet in this story, that sort of fundamental, what seems to be, material law is questioned, and fire doesn't burn. And not only fire doesn't burn, but there are no side effects, no after effects. I think any of us, if we've participated in a summer campfire or there's been an open fire, the smell of smoke, it just permeates everywhere. It's really hard to avoid. Even if you get a little too close to the fire, very easy to singe a few hairs maybe on the back of your hand or something like that. But in this story, there's no trace of any sort of side effect or after effect. It's just a really complete healing. And I think that's just a really comforting thought to know that not only are we going to be delivered from the fire, but it's going to be 100%, maybe 110%, that God's going to take us all the way. So that's something I really like about the story.
I really enjoy the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It seems to parallel a lot of things that I think about in life. I think mostly the thread of when you're going through a hard experience, that's an analogy like moving through the fire that we see when the 3 Hebrew boys are not meeting what the king says is the standard of God. And so I think really it's that idea when you're in that challenge, when you're in that fire, that you can look to God and you can go back to that place of total assurance and find that peace even in the midst of the storm. I think that's, in my own life when I've faced challenges or been in over my head or thinking about those storms, those fires, those whatevers, those big deals, that I like to think of it as a backbone, that, God, the truth, the love of the one God, which was what those guys were trying to demonstrate and really hold to as their primary focus in life, that doesn't hurt you. And so I think that's what I love about this story. Mary Baker Eddy also talks about, in her chapter on prayer, it's a really simple idea, but she talks about that no loss can occur from trusting God with our desires. And so that, maybe the apparent loss seems to be moving through the fire, but really it's so cool that we come right through it and we're unharmed, unmarred by whatever challenges or struggles we seem to be going through. In fact, we're strengthened, so this is good news.
One thing I love about this story is the defiance to tyranny that you see. Halfway through when King Nebuchadnezzar is questioning them, is it true you haven't been following my laws? They immediately quit back, we are not careful to answer thee, O king. And they say that God will deliver us from this ordeal, but even if he doesn't, we will still not obey your laws. At that point, I have to wonder what would have been going through their minds, what they would have been praying about. It's probably reasonable to assume they would have prayed, God, spare me from this furnace. I would not like to be incinerated alive today. But what's interesting is that doesn't happen. They aren't spared the furnace by any means. But they are spared the suffering, because right in the midst of the hottest flames, they see the Son of God, the living Christ, walking among them. And that not only delivers them from the pain, it transforms the entire kingdom. And I think that's a message that's still relevant today. While we may not be faced with exactly the same situation, you can certainly relate to situations where it feels like you're being thrown into a room of fire. It feels like the ordeal is overwhelming, overpowering. But right in the midst of that, no matter how dire it may seem, right there is the Christ waiting to deliver you. And that can have such a transformative power, not only for yourself, but for everyone around you.